Thank you for joining me on the Southern Report for yet another report and the utter privilege that I have of talking to an amazing guest. So I'm going to bring my guest on, which is Mr. Niall McCrae. He will explain who he is, and we will get straight into the subject that we are going to talk about today. So thank you very much. Niall, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. And what is a real pleasure is to have someone from the UK pushing a bit against all of this agenda in regard to climate change, the net zero, and all the nuttiness and madness, which is actually deeply concerning global tyranny. So, Niall, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Mark.
No, it's a pleasure. Could you please start off with explaining who you are, where you used to teach, maybe what you're doing now, and more importantly, about the book of yours that we are going to talk about? Thank you.
Okay, well, I was a lecturer, actually a senior lecturer at King's College London. For about 20 years I worked there. And during my time at the university, I was engaged in some very subversive activities. I was buying conservative newspapers like the Daily Telegraph, which now is much of a disappointment of a newspaper, as all the newspapers are. But at the time, that was an act of resistance against the, progressive liberal kind of hegemony. And then I started writing articles. So 2015, I think, I wrote an article for Spiked website. And then I became a regular writer for Conservative Woman, and then for the Bruges group, which was important around the time of the EU referendum. And all the time I was writing stuff which was complete heresy in the academic culture. And just sort of bring us up to date, really. So Robert Olds of the Bruges group, he and I wrote a book 4 years ago called Moralitas, a Cultural Virus. And that was focusing on woke ideology. And it's through my understanding of that kind of, shall I say, more and more extreme, more and more shrill expression of the sort of progressive leftist ideology that I'd become used to. It was gradually getting worse, gradually getting more and more in your face. And it was becoming harder and harder in a university to, just ignore this stuff. You couldn't ignore it. You're being forced to do certain training sessions and to, it's becoming impossible to be true to yourself working in that environment, which is largely why I left the university situation. But it's through my research on woke ideology that I became aware that green ideology is just as much a contrivance, and it's for basically the same purpose, which is to destroy society as it is, to create a new world order.
So there you are. I mean, I am fascinated by this, and also I take my hat off to you because there's a number of things that I can identify with in parallel. I take my hat off to you in all sincerity for being in that university academic situation, and actually, this is not tongue-in-cheek, but genuinely sitting down and going, I'm going to read the Telegraph. I am a conservative, and my conservative values, and I am going to push back. What kind of aggression, so to speak, did you have the other way? Were you made to, because we're seeing it, of course, unfold big time now, but were you made to feel uncomfortable? Were people wanting you to walk out the door, etc., etc.? How did people come against you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose I was fairly cautious in how blatantly I would talk about my views, but clearly there's a large number of people in King's College London when I was there who didn't go along with the progressive agenda, but they'd learned you have to be quiet. You only talk to trusted colleagues about what your real views are. But undoubtedly, more and more woke people are coming through. It's a march through the institutions, isn't it? And so gradually, universities have become more and more hostile places for people of conservative mindset. Did I get into trouble? The first time that I personally got into hot water was when the King's College London LGBTQ Association, or whatever they were called, back in about 2017, I think this was, outside King's College London on the Strand is a very visible, what they call the Wall of Fame, which is all these, illustrious alumni of King's College London over the centuries. And one of the images was of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, and LGBT students group was trying to get that image removed because Lord Carey had voted against gay marriage in the House of Lords. And I always thought that Lord Carey was, a good man, a genuinely conservative and caring Christian figure, but that he was being treated as some kind of pariah. And King's College London initially resisted this pressure from students, but eventually what they did was they removed the image, and after it had gone, they said that they needed the space on that lengthy Wall of Fame for a digital display. And to me, that was just such institutional deceit, because they had backed down to this student group. And I wrote an article on that with a fellow writer, Jules Gomez, who is a Christian pastor. And Jules wrote for the Conservative Woman website, like me. And we decided to do a joint article because Jules, not normally with these social commentary articles, as you'll know, Mark, it's solo kind of writing, but occasionally I'll see reason to do a jointly written piece. And this, I think, was probably the first one I did. And straight away I was in trouble, because the reason I wanted Jules to help me with it is because he had much more of a knowledge of Lord Carey from the past than I did. So I wrote this kind of more local stuff about what happened at King's, and Jules wrote the sort of second half of the piece, which was about the context, And Jules used the term gay starpo, as in G-A-Y, starpo. And he didn't make it up. It was a term that you could see on the internet around that time. And it was just a passing phrase about how the militant LGBT activists are, enforcing their extreme ideology. And that's all it meant. It wasn't a slur on all gay people by any means. And the article made it clear that it wasn't, against all people of homosexual orientation at all. But and actually, the article was initially highlighted in all the mainstream media for the right reasons, which was that Lord Carey's image had been taken down because of this woke student campaign. The Daily Telegraph, the Times, the Daily Mail all had editorials on our article. It was brilliant. And it was only about 3 or 4 days later, I was feeling on top of the world, when I got a call out of the blue from BuzzFeed. You know them?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And some very angry BuzzFeed journalist on the phone to me, shouting down the phone at me, saying they were doing a piece on me, and then I was in trouble, and I had to I was summoned to the principal's office. But Actually, he was fine. You know, he was just worried that some major benefactors were going to withdraw their money from King's, which, you know, like all major universities, rely heavily on funding by alumni. So that was, but the first cut is the deepest, Mark, and that was, you know, when you're attacked the first time, you feel the sharpness of the weapons used against you. You know, after that, it's never as bad. But that first time, I remember having some sort of sleepless nights about that.
That is what you've just said is extremely profound. I can identify with that, and I appreciate that. So the principal, you know, he was worried about the sort of alumni brigade then withdrawing their finances. Then how, with the recent when we've discovered that various heads of a particular head of a university in America has then got done for plagiarism and all this kind of thing, and under the whole sort of DEI and all this. Neil, when you reflect back to what you went through and where we are now, how do you feel about that? Because you mentioned that phrase, you know, the long march through the institutions, and you're absolutely right. Do you think that basically their marching steps have really got a lot faster?
Yes, absolutely. I think that if you go back to the Frankfurt School in the 1920s, you know, those professors realized that it'd be almost impossible to have a Bolshevik style revolution in established democratic nations of Western Europe, and that the bonds of faith, flag, and family were very strong. So there would have to be, you know, there would have to be some chiseling going on over many years or decades to kind of gradually destroy this great sort of stone edifice of traditional society. And that's very slow at first, almost unnoticeable, the damage that they're causing. But as they make progress, you know, it becomes that there's more stone that's been knocked off than stone there's left to chip away at, if you know what I mean. And I would say that, you know, certainly has been where we've been getting to in recent decades. That it's almost like the cultural Marxists are having to struggle now to think of new things to attack because they've attacked so much.
Wow. And of course, within looking at it's very interesting because with Carey, and I agree with him. All Carey's doing is coming from his faith point of view, and he is saying, well, I didn't write the Bible, but this is what the Bible says, right? So that he is entitled to his opinion. That's his belief, as it is mine. But to then people feel so offended that they want a name taken, they want a person taken, where they don't feel secure enough to actually engage with those views. That is what always gets me, Neil. You can't seem to be able to sit down with the mauve hair, pink hair, green hair brigade. Yes, I am being deeply sarcastic. You can't sit down with them and then have a conversation. Is that because they define everything from their feelings instead of respecting someone else's opinion and facts on a variety of issues?
But like you say, everyone is entitled to their opinions, but we're not entitled to our own facts. And now something that's been done in universities since the 60s really is to dismantle the notion of objective truth and to have multiple truths. And that sort of individualist approach to reality has now kind of become something else, because the aim of the deconstructionists, I'm talking about Foucault and Derrida, the sort of left bank philosophers who carried the cultural Marxist project forward in 50s and 60s. Their aim was, again, to destroy what was there. And the best way to destroy that was just to deny this, the whole sort of factual, scientific structures of knowledge, and bring in this idea of multiple truths, phenomenology, if you like. But that was only a means to an end, because they don't really want something called individual truth. They want ideological purity. And that is not individual, that's collective. So this is quite hard for people to get to grips with. What people often see things in terms of simplistic dichotomies, but actually the people who are running this kind of long-term program to destroy society and then to build something new in its place will often use something that seems right and positive, particularly to the younger generations, fooling those younger generations into supporting something. They're doing it with the climate agenda, for example. They're doing it with the trans agenda, for another example. But the idea of individual truth was really just an interim, because they don't really want people to have freedom of thought, which is what you would think individual truth is about. No, they want people to be fully compliant and to conform to the dogma of the regime. And what's confusing a lot of people, I think, is that I've written very much about cultural Marxism, and people will say, well, look, come on, these oligarchs running the world, the international bankers, big tech, big pharma, and all that, Bill Gates, they're hardly Marxist, are they? And I agree, they're not Marxists. But the people who are really in charge, that's the faceless people at the top of the pyramid. I've got this structure in my book, Green in Tooth and Claw, where I've got the apex of the pyramid, occupied by people we don't know. We can't know them, because they operate behind the curtain, and they allow frontmen like Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, George Soros. These people are not really Marxists, are they? But they've been using the tactics of cultural Marxism, because they're very effective, to destroy traditional society.
Absolutely. And what is wonderful about talking to you, and especially as some of, a number of my audience are in the United States, which in many ways is quite a focus for me right now. But it's what is important for me is that they are then hearing what's happening within our own country, which of course is reflecting back to them what's happening within their country, as it's happening within many, many countries around the world. And if nothing else, as much as it may seem depressing, there's nothing we can do. But on the other hand, it's trying to encourage each other to say we need to reach across these international boundaries as countries, even though people like George Soros would like to get rid of them tomorrow, to encourage each other. And Neil, I'm very grateful for the fact that for Conservative Woman, and I thank you for the articles that you have written in there, like other friend of mine has as well. I think what would be quite good, before I move into your book, which I'm going to, could you define what a conservative is? Because I think this is a huge pivot here. It's very clever from the other side, because they won't allow us in many ways to do that, because when we do, it all sounds quite common sense. But that seems to be something that they're lacking. Could you define what a conservative is?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that human society, wherever it is in time or place, always needs a combination of continuity and change. Too much continuity and society becomes stagnant and may just die. Too much change and society will have all kinds of problems: mental health, crime, destitution. I think societies need to establish some kind of order, but the order needs to be open to new knowledge, open to scientific discoveries, open to progressive, I mean, I'm using the words in a more genuine sense, progressive, ethical kind of ideas. So a conservative to me is somebody who values continuity, who sees the benefits of what's gone before, and takes a longer term perspective that goes backwards as much as it goes forwards, and so they're often called regressive. But it is truly valuable to go look back. I mean, if we didn't have anything conservative in our society, we would forget all about Aristotle and Plato, wouldn't we? We'd forget our religions as well. So conservatism helps to preserve, hopefully, what's the best in society. And progressives, they will look to improve society by changing what's the worst in society. I suppose that's, very simply how I see the difference. Now, I can, and I'm sure you're the same, Mark, I can have good conversations with people who are progressively minded, because I realize that they have a role to play and that their approach is something that has value, even if I might not agree with everything they would like to do. Right. But what we have, and this goes back to your previous question, what we have with people in the kind of woke culture is following the cultural Marxist tenet of repressive tolerance. And that was devised by Herbert Marcuse. And we can really see how much that has become ingrained now in how the progressive leftists deal with us as conservatives. We don't even have a valid opinion to them. There is no purpose in discussing things with us, in seeking our opinions. We are of oppressor status. You and I being white males of probably Christian background, we are of oppressor status, and therefore we must be oppressed. And you see this all the time now with quotas and with look at the adverts on TV. There's never a white man to be seen, unless there's some role in the advert required for somebody who appears stupid.
I hear, and there was a recent conference where independent production companies that were run by ITV, someone from ITV, you would go and pitch an idea, and this ITV executive was, found saying, don't bring any white talent here. So this whole ethos that has gone through is shocking. Is shocking. Now, because of the age I am, when I was a lot younger, I thought we've come a long way in regard to race relations. There are a load of, you're not seeing the color, you're seeing people for who they are. Where people were really, really looking at what Martin Luther King actually said about people's character, who they are. We're not judging them by the color of the skin. And I'm not saying that we haven't had problems like that in this country in the past. We have. And of course, you and I might be a little bit older. We've grown through the Brixton riots, Peckham riots, Toxteth, all the rest from a variety, they've all started in variety of different ways, but there is also a particular theme. But the fact that we're even having to discuss these things now, for me, is at times I'm just shocked, where, of course, grow up with where friends, there's mixed marriages from racial backgrounds and all the rest. It's not a question we'd even asked ourselves. And then suddenly we're thrust into that, the whole, as you said, victimology, the victim and the oppressor. And here we are. And of course, Marcuse has quite a lot to answer for that. So I'm going to put up the graphic, which it seems a very simple thing to say, but he has. And Neil, one of the wonderful things about having these kinds of conversations, and these need to happen more to each other's face and on a broader scale, is that it does our mental health profound good, because it challenges us to look at the research and find out, why have we reached this? What's gone on in the institutions? And that's why, bless you, you are in a very unique position, because you've spent 22 years embedded, so to speak, in the belly of the beast, and you've seen this change. I have a secondary school education background as well. I've seen that. If I look at the national curriculum and all the rest, it's a very interesting parallel walk of one size fits all. We might not have realized that in 1988 when it came in, but one size fits all. We're not looking at the individually, and also not celebrating achievement. No, we don't want to do that. We just want to keep everyone dumbed down, and then you and I could have a long discussion about grammar schools. I went to a grammar school. Children have been to a grammar school, other friends have been to a grammar school, and there seems to be a link there in regard to people freely thinking. So that has always interested me. So I'm just going to put a graphic up of your book. And so, Neil, when did you write this? Green in Tooth and Claw. When did you write this? And could you please explain to us why you chose that title, which I think is quite clever. I love the fact that you've got on there, net zero kills. You are the carbon they want to reduce. I don't think you could explain it so succinctly. Why that title?
Well, that comes from Lord Tennyson, who's the poet, and
Right.
He talked about nature red in tooth and claw. And the colours red and green, funnily enough, often go together, don't they? We have James Dellingpole's book, Watermelons, which was about how these followers of green ideology are only green on the outside. Inside they're red, Marxists. And that's been quite important to understanding how the green movement has developed. But the idea of things being green, it's such a nice term, isn't it? It's such a nice colour. But as usual, Mark, everything the regime, for want of a better word, is doing to us is purely Orwellian. It's everything that they say, everything that they claim is really the opposite. they accuse us of things which are really what they're guilty of.
Yeah.
But the word green, increasingly, for anyone that's awake to what's going on, really means synthetic.
Can you follow that thought? Can you follow that thought? Can you explain that a bit more? And and why you've reached that conclusion? What's the background to that?
Okay, so I'll try and be brief with this. I'm getting better at this. I've done so many presentations of the book, so I think I could do this in a few minutes without sending everyone to sleep. So Charles Darwin, Theory of Evolution, mid-19th century, was a really, really significant event in the development of human society, because two things that Darwin's theory did is, firstly, it negated the veracity of Holy Scripture in terms of, the age of Earth, rather than being 5,000 years old, millions and millions of years. But secondly, perhaps more significantly, it removed the special status of human beings. We had evolved just like any other animal. That's if you believe the theory, and the theory has never really been 100% proven, has it? But generally speaking, it's taught as though it's a pretty settled fact. The science is settled, as they say. Now, Darwin's cousin was a man called Francis Galton, and he founded the Eugenics Society. So how did we get from evolution to eugenics? Well, really, there was just one step between them, and that was that with Darwin's theory, people in the intelligentsia of the time immediately started, working out, how does this relate to human society? And the ruling class in the late 19th century were beginning to get worried, because the Industrial Revolution had been built on the labor of a vast and rapidly growing working class workforce. And over time, with Christian philanthropy and with the working class themselves getting together, and to, the burgeoning sort of trade union movement, there was a real fear among the ruling classes that they could be overwhelmed by just the sheer weight of numbers of people that had been produced by industrialized society.
Right.
And there was also a sense that the quality of this human stock was declining. The people living in the mill towns, in those damp terraced houses, were not of the same health and vigor as the sort of agricultural laborers who had fought for Britain at Waterloo. So this raised the idea that instead of the principle of nature being survival of the fittest, human society was creating survival of the unfittest, you see. And so eugenics became very big in the early 20th century. And I believe that the First World War was the first major act of eugenics. The official story is that Archduke Ferdinand was shot in Serbia, and somehow that led to millions of young men dying in the Western Front. It's not really a satisfactory story, is it? But whatever you believe about the First World War, there was no doubt that we went from cull to collectivism. So 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the first big experiment in a totalitarian society. Okay, I mean, I'm sure there have been totalitarian societies in the past, but this was the first systematic, supposedly scientifically based organization of society as a authoritarian control grid, really. Now, at the same time as Russia, the Soviet Union is running and getting properly going in the 1920s. There were two other important developments, one of which I've mentioned already, so I'll just very, very briefly mention it again here, was the founding of the Frankfurt School and the cultural Marxists. I've already talked about that. The other big development was an organization which later became known as Technocracy Incorporated. And that was in North America. In Canada and the US, it was a quite popular movement with, I think, hundreds of thousands of members. And the idea of Technocracy Incorporated was that as technology is advancing, we'll soon have the means to manage society in a totally organized way, orderly sort of fashion. So rather than have the mess of democracy and debate, political battles, get rid of politics, get rid of ideology, and just have society run by a technocratic elite. And the currency, instead of being money in your pocket, the currency would be energy. So there would be total control of resources. And this goes alongside the eugenics sort of idea of total control of population. Now, eugenics got a bad name in the Second World War with the Nazis, Dr. Mengele and all that sort of thing. So 1946, I think, the United Nations, one of the first agencies that was founded was UNESCO, and its director was Julian Huxley. And Julian Huxley basically said, I'm paraphrasing, not his exact words, basically said, eugenics is dead, long live eugenics. And so Julian Huxley realized that to pursue this ideology of drastically reducing the global population, because not enough had died in the Second World War. It wasn't the carnage that you'd. Well, I mean, some countries suffered terribly in the Second World War, like Russia. Russia lost 20 million. The countries of Western Europe, Britain lost a fraction of the number that it lost in the First World War. So eugenics continued, and it was rebranded in the color green. They invented a ecological doom, which would require all kinds of radical things to be done in a short space of time. The population bomb in 1968 by Paul Ehrlich predicted that unless population was severely cut, there would be a catastrophe for humankind in the next 15 years or so. But so going into the 1980s, there'd be disaster. And the other thing that happened in 1968 was the Rockefellers founded Club of Rome, which was arguably the most influential globalist organization ever, because it has totally consumed the United Nations. All of the United Nations agenda now is directed towards this claimed climate crisis.
Great.
So
Sorry.
Those both happened in 1968, and I don't need to say much more right now, Mark. Just to say that everything that started in 1968 has just continued since, but the pace has accelerated.
Because when we think of 1968, we think of the student riots in Paris, France, etc., and this uprising. And of course, by then, within America, it was very much immersed in the Vietnam protests, etc. Hippies putting flowers in the rifle barrels of police and military and stuff like that. So this whole thing of that was the cultural discourse that was going on. Going back, you and I think have touched on this on my friend's other program, but going back, when we talk about Huxley, and I'm reminded that Henry Huxley, who was Darwin's right-hand man, was either their great-great-grandfather. Then Aldous Huxley, what book did Aldous Huxley wrote? He wrote Brave New World, right? And then people think that when we come out with this stuff, they think that we're nuts, or they call us a conspiracy theorist, and which we've all had. And then we turn around and say, no, we're bringing the truth, because these are the facts. And of course, people, as you quite rightly said, have difficulty with the facts. I'm fascinated what you've just said about to have a technocracy instead of as a ruling class, instead of giving up with politics. I also understand that during the 30s, in regard to the sort of technocracy movement in Canada, it was headed up by Elon Musk's great-grandfather. Now, I ask people to go and do the research, check this out, because once they start going down the rabbit hole, this gets very, very interesting.
Yes, indeed. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark, because something that I try and get across at my presentations, well, there's two important points that I always start with. The first is that the book has got no scientific tables or graphs or statistical data at all. It's not a scientific treatise, and that's because my argument is that climate change has got nothing to do with science.
Brilliant.
It's an ideological movement to create this global technocracy. But secondly, people tend to think, and I did too until recently, people tend to think that woke and green, which I describe as a nexus, two sides of the same coin, people tend to think that they're relatively recent. So, I'm old enough to remember going to school when we got nothing about a climate crisis at all. And we got nothing about woke ideology and all the identity politics. They just weren't even on the radar to me in my school days. And that can give the impression that these things are fairly recent, sort of 90s onwards, that sort of thing. But no, they all go back over 100 years. So woke started with the Frankfurt School in the 1920s. Green ideology has basically come from eugenics. And it is eugenics, right? It's about depopulation.
You control the energy. You control the energy. You freeze people to death.
Yeah, you control the energy and you control everything.
No.
But you mentioned Elon Musk's grandfather. And again, this takes us back to, 100 years ago. The Great Depression. Musk's family was farming in way out west in Canada somewhere. And people were suffering quite badly. And this is what gave Technocracy Incorporated a fillip. It's that society seemed to have taken a massive knock. The structures and institutions of society. How can this really happen? Devastation. And so that led people into thinking that if we create a more organized, structured society, then this won't happen. Musk's grandfather, they eventually emigrated to South Africa. And Elon Musk used to love reading his grandfather's books, which were all about technocracy. And of course, Musk for all the good things he seems to do from time to time, he's very much a globalist technocrat, and but the ideas came from that organization way back in the 1930s, Technocracy Incorporated.
So how would you we're in the last sort of 10 minutes, and Neil, thank you for an amazing discussion so far, because I like encouraging people to do this, which is to sit down and have a conversation, start stimulating each other intellectually, start looking at all this, start throwing all these ideas around. Yes, I want people to come to the conclusion that we're talking about, not necessarily not on the other side. But I think if we go back, you raise a brilliant thing historically. Do you remember when they used to go on about acid rain? Right.
Yeah, I do. And but when I was growing up, if there was any big scare at all, it was of nuclear Armageddon. And I actually lived in the west of Scotland, a town called Gourock, if people want to look it up on the map. I doubt many people have heard of it. It's about 30 miles west of Glasgow. And the River Clyde goes through Glasgow, where it's quite narrow, but it ends up at the at Gourock, where it's about 2 to 3 miles wide. A lovely view from my parents' house and looking across to the start of the Highlands. And across the Clyde is a town called Dunoon. And to the side of Dunoon was a small sort of inlet called the Holy Loch. And the Americans had a nuclear submarine base there. And that would have been one of the first targets for the Soviet Union, where, buttons to be pressed and that sort of thing. And yet, I don't remember going to school, anyone at school, being petrified about nuclear war. We didn't even think about this base that was, just almost within touching distance of our lives. We didn't even think about it. And I think that with the nuclear scare, I think the people pushing the green, the climate hoax, have learned lessons from that. They've learned that you have to work really hard to get people scared.
Yes.
Look how much they terrified people with COVID. So at least on a short-term basis, they could create the idea of an emergency. But I think they've been struggling with the climate change agenda. I mean, I know a lot of your viewers are in the US, Mark, and I think the American people can be, well, critical thinkers in America can be fairly proud that their country is perhaps one of the most skeptical about the climate change agenda. Pew Research polls I keep an eye on show a consistent increase in distrust of the official message on climate change.
But it's not, and which doesn't help when we have all these politicians coming forward going, trust the science. And of course, that is a phrase that's been completely and utterly discredited, as we know of late. And I just like to publicly say this, that, you and I don't sit here going, oh, we want to be right. Well, we are right, but we haven't wanted to be, because in some ways, because we see the cost of how that's played out on other people in regard to injuries and stuff that we have. And I know you have, as we have mutual friends have had, who have spoken out to say, please don't go down this line. This is horrifying. And why are we having lockdowns? This will not work. But quickly going back to but very interesting what you were saying about nuclear, and we go back to then acid rain, and Rupert Darwell's book, which you refer to, you credit in your book, and I was speaking to you about this off camera, which is green tyranny, and in here, Rupert then reminds us of. So you had, the acid rain. So they create this narrative, and within Sweden, it was then, trying to stop then building any more, in one sense, nuclear reactors, or no, that there was a line they then went down. Hopefully I'll get various facts right or wrong there. But then we look at this whole thing of what was it to do with our fridges and what fridges give off? What was that? I'm just trying to think.
CFC.
CFC, thank you. And then it was the hole in the ozone layer, or before that, it was a hole in the ozone layer, wasn't it? And then they're saying that CFCs. Now, it's a bit like, so when we talk about the left and the right paradigm, on a personal level, I have moved from what people perceive to be the perceived left to the perceived right. Definitely, right? Some people haven't liked that at all, but I have. Which I think makes us even more dangerous, because we know what we don't believe, and we know what we do believe, and we know where we've come from. And I think that is part of the problem, because people aren't thinking about this enough. What do you think of you amuse me when you said there's no statistics in there, so that you haven't got a hockey stick in there from the East Anglia University at all?
So I do mention the hockey stick, because that was one of the first clear frauds that were committed by green scientists. But there's no dabbling in the statistical evidence. Look, it's important that there are writers that do this. It's important that we have the Nobel Prize winning experts in meteorology and other related topics who can properly debunk the claims of the net zero zealots. But my book is exploring the cultural motives for the climate agenda. And I would probably have been surprised at myself if 5 years ago even you were to tell me that I'd be writing a book about how the ruling class, a predatory ruling class, is trying to kill us. I thought, come on, I'll never get into that. Leave that to David Icke. But I'm afraid to say it really is true. This is very serious. This shouldn't just be about rebutting some of the claims made about temperature rises and carbon dioxide concentrations. This is far more serious than that. And we have got to wake as many people up as we can before it's too late. Because younger generations are being indoctrinated with this dogma in the education system. We've really got to do our very best to alert people to the very dystopian future that's planned for us. I mean, in short, they want to impoverish, enslave, and depopulate humanity. They chose carbon as a thing to focus on for their climate agenda, because we are the carbon they want to reduce.
Hence the wonderful comment on, let's bring it up again, the wonderful comment on the front of your book. Neil, we're in the last minute or two. Where can people find your work? Where can people go and find your book? I'll get you to say that straight from the horse's mouth.
Okay, well, the book is available on Amazon. UK price is £12.99. It can also be ordered directly from the Bruges Group, which is a publisher. So I know a lot of people don't like Amazon. And in terms of my presence online, well, I'm a bit elusive. I mean, I write articles regularly, for various websites. And I am on the sort of relative backwater. It's not. I was on Twitter in the past, but I came off it. So I'm on Gab now. So I'm Dr._Niall McCrae at gab.com. If you want to see my daily diatribes.
Well, no, that is brilliant, and no, that's brilliant. I'm grateful for your daily diatribes, as I know that other people are. So please, thank you. But sorry, Neil, to rush you. But is there any other out there? Anything that you have missed where we can find you?
Books and articles. Just I don't know if people still use Google because Google does hide a lot of stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There are other search engines, Yandex, for example, which is Russian, where you can find all my stuff just by typing me in. Because I think Google censorship has gradually been getting worse. But all I'd say is it's a shameless plug, Mark. But I would say please order my book, because I think it's not only interesting to people in the audience tonight to read it. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But yeah, do get a copy and spread it around, even if it's just one or two people that read it who are not quite where we are yet. You're making a difference.
Thank you, Neil. I just want to thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for a very wonderful and stimulating conversation. And the other thing is that I hope you will come back and do it again with me, because I think there are a number of routes that we go down, and I really hope that a number of us can get in the same room and encourage each other, and maybe have a conference over here. I would really love to see that happen. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to say goodbye to Neil on the other side, but I'm going to play us out. And thank you for joining us. Please like, share, subscribe, and get this out there. It's really important that we have these conversations, and it's really important that we share them. Neil, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to play us out. Thank you.